After spending the night with his mistress, he realized his wife had vanished with their newborn. The amber glow of the hotel's digital clock read 5:47 a.m. when Jesse Donovan slowly opened his eyes. The unfamiliar ceiling came into focus as the weight of where he was, and where he wasn't supposed to be, settled like lead in his chest. Beside him, Madison Clark lay sleeping, her auburn hair spilled across the white pillowcase like spilled wine. The soft rise and fall of her breathing was the only sound in the cramped downtown Seattle hotel room, save for the distant hum of early morning traffic beginning to stir the city awake. Jesse's phone buzzed against the nightstand, then again, and again. 12 missed calls, all from Veronica, his wife, the mother of his 2-day-old son, the woman who had just endured 14 hours of labor while he told her he needed to clear his head and process everything. The woman who believed his lie about needing space to adjust to fatherhood, when the truth was far more selfish and far more devastating. Jesse stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over Veronica's contact photo. Her smile looked back at him, the same radiant expression she'd worn when she first told him she was pregnant 9 months ago, before the sleepless nights of worry about money, about readiness, about whether he was truly cut out to be a father, before Madison had started staying late at the office with him, listening to his fears and offering comfort that slowly transformed into something else entirely. Another text appeared. "Jesse, please call me. The baby has been crying for hours and I don't know what to do. I need you." His stomach twisted. Madison stirred beside him, her hand reaching across the sheets to find his arm. "Morning already?" she whispered, her voice husky with sleep. "Come back to bed." Jesse looked down at her, 28 years old, unmarked by the responsibilities that felt like they were suffocating him. No stretch marks, no exhaustion from night feedings, no expectations of forever. Just escape wrapped in smooth skin and promises that tomorrow didn't have to matter. He set the phone face down on the nightstand without responding to Veronica's messages. "Just a few more minutes," he whispered back, though every instinct screamed that he should be home, should be holding his son, should be supporting the woman who had carried their child and was now facing the overwhelming reality of new motherhood alone. But facing Madison was easier than facing the magnitude of what his life had become. Here, in this anonymous room, he could pretend he was still the man he used to be, unencumbered, spontaneous, free. The phone buzzed again. This time, he turned it off completely. 3 hours later, Jesse stood in the driveway of the modest 2-bedroom house he and Veronica had bought just before the pregnancy. The morning sun cast long shadows across the brown grass that he'd been meaning to reseed for months. His key felt heavy in his hand as he approached the front door, rehearsing explanations that sounded hollow even in his own mind. The house was silent. Not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping family, but the absolute stillness of absence. Jesse's footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as he called out, "Veronica? I'm home, babe. Sorry about last night." The words died in his throat as he entered the nursery. The crib was empty. Not just empty, stripped. The blue fitted sheet with tiny elephants was gone. The mobile they'd spent an evening assembling together was missing from above the mattress. Even the small lamp shaped like a crescent moon had vanished from the dresser. Jesse's hands trembled as he pulled open drawers that should have been filled with onesies and tiny socks. Empty. Every single one. He ran to their bedroom, panic building in his chest like a scream. Veronica's side of the closet gaped open, revealing empty hangers swaying slightly in the draft from the heating vent. Her jewelry box was gone from the dresser, the framed photo of their wedding day, absent. On the kitchen table, weighted down by her wedding ring, was a single envelope with his name written in Veronica's careful handwriting. Jesse's hands shook so violently he could barely tear it open. "While you were sleeping with her, I finally woke up to who you really are. Our son and I deserve better than being the burden you run from. Don't look for us. We're learning to live without disappointment." The letter fluttered to the floor as Jesse sank into a chair, the magnitude of his choices crashing over him like a cold wave. Outside, Seattle continued its morning routine. Coffee shops opening, commuters heading to work, life moving forward as it always did. But inside this house, time had stopped, and Jesse Donovan was about to learn the true cost of believing that some choices could be undone. The Seattle Police Department's missing persons unit felt like a fluorescent-lit purgatory. Jesse had been sitting in the hard plastic chair for 2 hours, watching Detective Riley Martinez flip through paperwork with the practiced indifference of someone who had seen this story too many times before. "Mr. Donovan," Detective Martinez said without looking up. Your wife left voluntarily. She took her belongings, her car, and her child. There's no crime here. But she just disappeared, Jesse insisted, his voice cracking with desperation. No forwarding address, no contact information. She closed our joint bank account, canceled her phone. People don't just vanish. Detective Martinez finally looked up, her dark eyes holding neither sympathy nor judgment, just tired recognition. Mr. Donovan, in my experience, when a new mother disappears this completely, this quietly, she's running from something, or someone. The words hit Jesse like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to protest, but what could he say? That he was a devoted husband? That Veronica had no reason to run? The lies felt heavy on his tongue. I just want to know that my son is safe, he whispered. Your son is with his mother. That's the safest place he can be. Detective Martinez closed the file and stood up. If Mrs. Donovan wants to contact you, she will. My advice? Give her space to make that choice. Jesse's phone rang as he sat in his car outside the police station, staring at the gray Seattle sky. Madison's name flashed on the screen. He'd been avoiding her calls all day, but the silence in his house was becoming unbearable. Jesse? Thank God you answered. I've been worried sick. Madison's voice carried the breathless concern of someone who believed she cared. You left the hotel so suddenly this morning. What happened? She's gone, Madison. Veronica took the baby and disappeared. There was a pause, then, oh my God, are you okay? Do you want me to come over? No. The word came out sharper than he intended. I need to be alone right now. Jesse, this isn't your fault. You can't blame yourself for what? For sleeping with you while my wife was home alone with our newborn? Jesse laughed bitterly. What exactly shouldn't I blame myself for? Another pause. Longer this time. When Madison spoke again, her voice had shifted from concern to something colder. I'm not going to apologize for caring about you, Jesse. Your marriage was already broken. I didn't cause that. Jesse hung up without responding. Madison was wrong. His marriage hadn't been broken. Strained, yes. Complicated by new parenthood and financial stress. Absolutely. But not broken. He had broken it. In one night, with one choice, he had taken something fragile and beautiful and shattered it beyond repair. The next morning, Jesse stood outside Veronica's sister's apartment in Bellevue, pressing the buzzer for the third time. Elena had always been protective of Veronica, barely tolerating Jesse even during the good times. Now, she answered the door with ice in her eyes. She doesn't want to see you, Jesse. Elena, please, I just need to know they're okay. I need to explain. Explain what? That you couldn't handle being a father for 48 hours? Elena stepped onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind her. Do you know what Veronica was doing while you were out, clearing your head? She was up all night with a colicky baby, wondering if every cry meant something was wrong, if she was failing as a mother. She called her doctor 3 times because she was so scared and exhausted she thought she might hurt him by accident. Jesse felt his knees go weak. I didn't know, because you didn't ask, you just ran. Elena's voice was steady, but Jesse could see tears gathering in her eyes. That girl has loved you since college. She defended you when everyone said you weren't ready for marriage, for a baby. She believed in you right up until she realized you didn't believe in yourself. Where is she, Elena? Please, I don't know. And if I did, I wouldn't tell you. Elena turned toward the door, then paused. She asked me to give you something. She handed him a small envelope. Inside was a copy of their son's birth certificate. The baby's name was listed as Caleb Reed Donovan, but Veronica had crossed out Donovan with careful blue pen strokes. His name is Caleb, Elena said quietly, in case you were wondering what to call him when you think about what you've lost. That night, Jesse sat in the empty nursery, holding the birth certificate. Caleb. They had chosen the name together during one of their late-night conversations about the future, when Veronica was 6 months pregnant, and they were still planning a life as a family. He traced his finger over the crossed-out surname, and realized that Veronica wasn't just protecting their son from him. She was protecting him from inheriting the legacy of a father who had abandoned them when they needed him most. Outside, Seattle continued its indifferent rhythm. But inside this house, Jesse was learning that some absences echo louder than any presence ever could, and somewhere in the vast unknown, Veronica was discovering what it meant to be both mother and father to the child he had walked away from. The question that would haunt him wasn't whether he could find them, it was whether he deserved to. 3 weeks had passed since Veronica vanished, and Jesse's world was crumbling in slow motion. He sat across from his boss, Robert Hendricks, in the sterile conference room of Meridian Financial Consulting, watching the man's face grow increasingly stern as he reviewed Jesse's recent performance reports. "Your productivity has dropped 60%, Jesse. You missed the Morrison account presentation, you've been late to client meetings, and yesterday you fell asleep during the quarterly review." Robert leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled. "What's going on?" Jesse rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of sleepless nights and endless searching. "I'm going through some personal issues, Robert. My wife. We're having problems." "I'm sorry to hear that, but I can't run a business on sympathy." Robert's voice carried the cold efficiency that had made him successful. "You need to get your head right, or I'll have to make some difficult decisions." Jesse nodded, knowing he couldn't explain that every waking moment was consumed with calling hospitals, checking missing persons databases, and driving through neighborhoods hoping to catch a glimpse of Veronica's blue Honda Civic. How could he tell his boss that he'd destroyed his family and was now paying the price in every aspect of his life? "I understand," Jesse said quietly. "I'll do better." But even as he spoke the words, his phone buzzed with another dead-end response from a private investigator. Another day of nothing. Another reminder that Veronica had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. Meanwhile, 200 miles south in Tacoma, Veronica Reed, she'd legally reverted to her maiden name within a week of leaving, was learning to navigate a new life with the precision of someone who had no choice but to survive. The Sunrise Community Health Clinic wasn't glamorous. The linoleum floors were scuffed, the fluorescent lights hummed constantly, and the patient load was heavy. But Dr. Amanda Foster, the clinic director, had been Veronica's mentor during nursing school, and when Veronica called desperately needing work and a place to start over, Amanda didn't ask questions. "You're overqualified for this position," Dr. Foster had said during Veronica's informal interview in the cramped office behind the clinic. "But you look like someone who needs a safe place to land." Veronica had almost cried at the kindness in those words. "I am." Now, 3 weeks into her new routine, Veronica moved through her days with the careful efficiency of someone rebuilding from nothing. She woke at 5:30 a.m. in the small studio apartment she'd found above a bakery on Pacific Avenue. The space was barely 400 square feet, with a Murphy bed that she folded down each night and Caleb's crib squeezed into the corner by the tiny kitchenette. Every morning she fed Caleb, dressed him in second-hand clothes she'd bought from a thrift store, and walked 6 blocks to Mrs. Chen's home daycare. The elderly woman charged half what the commercial centers did, and had immediately fallen in love with Caleb's serious dark eyes and easy temperament. "He's a good baby," Mrs. Chen would say each morning as Veronica handed him over. "Babies know when their mama loves them." Veronica would smile and nod, but inside she carried a constant ache of uncertainty. Was she doing enough? Was she giving Caleb everything he needed? Or was she selfishly depriving him of his father because she couldn't face the pain of Jesse's betrayal? The clinic days were long but purposeful. Veronica worked with patients who couldn't afford fancy medical centers, undocumented immigrants, elderly folks on fixed incomes, young mothers like herself who were making impossible choices between rent and health care. Their struggles put her own situation in perspective. She wasn't the only woman who had been forced to start over. She wasn't the only mother raising a child alone. During her lunch break, she would sit in the small break room and pump breast milk while reviewing her budget on a yellow legal pad. Every expense was carefully calculated: rent, utilities, groceries, daycare, the used car payment for the reliable but unglamorous Toyota Corolla she'd bought to replace the Honda that Jesse might track. Some nights, after Caleb was asleep, she would lie on the Murphy bed and let herself remember the good times with Jesse. The way he used to bring her coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. How he'd talk to her belly during the pregnancy, telling Caleb about the baseball games they'd watch together and the camping trips they'd take. The man she'd fallen in love with in college, before the pressure of real life had revealed the cracks in his character. But those memories were dangerous. They made her question whether she'd been too hasty, too unforgiving, whether Caleb deserved the chance to know his father, flaws and all. Then she would remember that last night in the hospital, when Jesse had kissed her forehead and promised he'd be right back, just needed to clear his head. She'd believed him completely, had even felt guilty for being such a burden during those overwhelming first days of motherhood. The betrayal wasn't just about Madison. It was about the lies, the careful deception, the way he'd looked her in the eye and made promises he had no intention of keeping. Dr. Foster knocked on the break room door, interrupting Veronica's thoughts. "How are you settling in?" "Good," Veronica said, closing the legal pad quickly. Really good. Thank you again for this opportunity. Dr. Foster sat down across from her, her weathered face kind but knowing. You don't have to pretend with me, Veronica. I've been where you are. Different circumstances but the same fear. Veronica looked up, surprised by the admission. 22 years ago, I left an abusive marriage with nothing but my medical degree and a 6-year-old daughter. I know what it feels like to wonder if you're strong enough to rebuild. How did you know you'd made the right choice? Veronica asked quietly. Dr. Foster smiled. When I stopped looking over my shoulder for him and started looking ahead for us. That night, as Veronica fed Caleb his evening bottle in the lamplight of their tiny apartment, she realized she was already looking ahead, not to some grand future, but to tomorrow's small victories. Getting Caleb to daycare on time, helping her patients feel heard and cared for, building a life that was simple but honest. Jessie had taught her that love without respect was just beautiful wreckage. Now she was learning to build something that would last. The text from Madison arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, just as Jessie was finishing his third glass of whiskey, while staring at Caleb's empty crib. We need to talk. This isn't working anymore. Jessie stared at the message, his alcohol-fogged mind struggling to process what this even meant anymore. Their relationship, if it could be called that, had become a series of stolen moments and guilty silences since Veronica disappeared. Madison still wanted the romance, the excitement, the fantasy of being with him. But Jessie had learned the hard way that fantasy had a price tag he couldn't afford. He didn't respond to her text. Instead, he fell asleep in the nursery chair, the phone slipping from his fingers to clatter on the hardwood floor. The next morning, Madison cornered him in the break room at Meridian Financial. She looked polished as always, her navy blazer pressed, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. But there was something different in her eyes, something calculating. You can't keep avoiding me, Jessie, she said, closing the door behind her. People are starting to notice. Jessie poured coffee with shaking hands, his hangover making the fluorescent lights feel like knives. Notice what? That you look like hell, that you're barely functional, that you're grieving a woman who clearly doesn't want to be found. Madison's voice carried a sharp edge he'd never heard before. It's pathetic. The word hit him like a slap. Jessie turned to face her, seeing clearly for the first time the woman he'd thrown away his family for. The perfect makeup couldn't hide the coldness in her expression. The designer clothes couldn't disguise the selfishness in her posture. Pathetic? He repeated quietly. Yes, pathetic. You made a choice, Jessie. You chose me, and now you're acting like some tragic victim instead of moving forward with your life. Madison stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. We could be happy together. We could have the life you wanted without all the complications. Complications? Jessie's voice was deadly calm. You mean my son? Madison's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. I mean the baggage, the guilt, the endless drama of a woman who ran away instead of fighting for her marriage. Jessie stared at her, wondering how he'd ever found her attractive, how he'd ever confused her availability with desirability, her selfishness with confidence. Get out, he said quietly. Jessie, get out of my sight, Madison, and stay away from me. Her perfect composure finally cracked. You're making a mistake. I'm offering you a future, and you're choosing to wallow in the past. The past? Jessie laughed bitterly. Madison, my son isn't the past. He's everything I should have been fighting for. As Madison left, slamming the break room door behind her, Jessie realized that losing her felt like relief. The weight he'd been carrying wasn't just guilt. It was the burden of pretending that what they'd had was worth what it had cost. 3 hours later, Jessie's carefully constructed professional life finally collapsed entirely. Robert Hendricks called him into the office with 2 other partners present. Never a good sign. Jessie, we've received some concerning information about your conduct, Robert began, his voice formal and cold. Jessie's stomach dropped. What kind of information? Ms. Clark has filed a complaint alleging that you've been harassing her, making unwanted advances, and creating a hostile work environment. Robert consulted a legal document on his desk. She claims you've been pressuring her for a personal relationship and retaliating when she refused. The world tilted sideways. Jessie gripped the arms of his chair, feeling like he was falling through space. Robert, that's not what happened. She has text messages, Jessie. Documentation of after-hours meetings, hotel receipts. Robert's expression was stone. She's also mentioned that you've been struggling with alcohol and that your personal problems have affected your professional judgment. Madison had played him perfectly. She'd covered her tracks, rewritten their history, and positioned herself as the victim. Jesse could see it all now, the calculated precision of someone who had planned this conversation long before their confrontation in the break room. "I need you to clean out your desk," Robert continued. "Security will escort you out. We'll mail your final check." Jesse sat in stunned silence as 15 years of career building crumbled in a single conversation. "Robert, please. Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. The decision is final." An hour later, Jesse sat in his car in the parking garage, a cardboard box of personal items in his passenger seat. His career was over. His marriage was destroyed. His son was gone. And the woman he'd risked everything for had just delivered the final blow with surgical precision. His phone rang. For a moment, his heart leaped with the impossible hope that it might be Veronica. Instead, it was his mortgage company, calling about his late payment. Jesse let it go to voicemail. As he drove home through the gray Seattle afternoon, he passed a billboard advertising family insurance. A smiling father holding a toddler, promising to protect what matters most. Jesse had to pull over as the irony hit him like a physical blow. He'd spent months telling himself he was the victim of circumstances, that he'd made an understandable mistake under pressure. But sitting in his car with his entire life in ruins around him, Jesse finally understood the truth. He hadn't been overwhelmed by responsibility. He'd been terrified of it. And instead of facing that fear, he'd run toward something easy and temporary, abandoning everything permanent and precious. Madison had been right about one thing. He'd made a choice. But she was wrong about what choice he should make now. For the first time since Veronica left, Jesse knew exactly what he had to do. Not to win her back. That ship had sailed. But to become the man his son deserved, even if Caleb never knew his name. The question was whether it was already too late to matter. 6 months later, Veronica adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag as she pushed through the double doors of Sunrise Community Health Clinic, Caleb secure in his carrier against her chest. At 8 months old, he had developed Jesse's serious dark eyes, but her stubborn chin, a combination that made strangers smile and comment on how alert he seemed. "Morning, Mama," called out Rosa Martinez, the receptionist, as Veronica signed in for her shift. "How's our little man today?" "Teething," Veronica replied with a tired smile. "Which means neither of us got much sleep." Rosa laughed knowingly. "My youngest went through that last year. Try frozen washcloths. Worked like magic." These small exchanges had become precious to Veronica. The easy camaraderie of women who understood the exhaustion of single motherhood without judgment. The community she'd built here wasn't perfect, but it was real, honest, built on shared struggles rather than shared deceptions. Dr. Foster appeared from her office, coffee mug in hand. "Veronica, perfect timing. We have a new patient this morning. Young mother, about your age. First baby. She seems overwhelmed. I thought you might connect with her." Veronica nodded, understanding the unspoken request. Dr. Foster had a gift for matching patients with staff members who could offer more than just medical care. They could offer hope. 20 minutes later, Veronica sat across from Lily Torres, a 23-year-old who looked even younger, holding her 2-month-old daughter with the uncertain grip of someone still learning how to be a mother. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes hung loose on her small frame. "The baby cries all the time," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I'm doing it right. I don't think I'm cut out for this." Veronica felt a familiar pang of recognition. "What kind of support do you have at home?" Lily's face crumpled slightly. Her father, he said he needed space, that it was all happening too fast. He moved in with his brother last month. The words hit Veronica like a physical blow. Different circumstances, different people, but the same devastating pattern. She looked at Lily's daughter, tiny, perfect, depending entirely on a mother who felt abandoned and inadequate. "You're doing better than you think," Veronica said gently. "Can I show you something?" She demonstrated different holding positions, showed Lily how to recognize hunger cues versus fatigue, explained the normal patterns of infant sleep. But more importantly, she shared her own story, carefully edited, but honest about the fear and uncertainty of those early months. "I felt like I was failing every day," Veronica admitted as Lily's baby finally settled into peaceful sleep. "Like everyone else had received some manual for motherhood that I'd missed." "How did you get through it?" Lily asked. "One day at a time, and by accepting help when it was offered." Veronica wrote down the numbers for the local WIC office, a mom's support group, and a sliding-scale childcare program. You're not alone in this, even when it feels like you are. As Lily left with her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms, Dr. Foster appeared at Veronica's elbow. "You're wasted on just medical care," she said quietly. "Have you ever considered going back to school? Social work, maybe? Or counseling?" The suggestion planted a seed that Veronica carried with her for the rest of the day. That evening, after Caleb was fed and settled for the night, Veronica sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea and her laptop. The apartment felt less cramped now. She'd made it home with small touches. A few plants on the windowsill. Caleb's artwork, really just colorful scribbles, taped to the refrigerator. Photos of him learning to sit up, to grab toys, to smile at her like she was his entire world. Because she was. And that realization no longer felt like a burden. It felt like purpose. She opened the website for the University of Washington, Tacoma, and found herself browsing their social work program. Evening classes, online options, financial aid for single mothers. For the first time since leaving Seattle, Veronica allowed herself to imagine a future that extended beyond just surviving. She pictured herself helping other women like Lily, like herself, using her own pain to guide others through theirs. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "How are you and Caleb doing? Mom wants to visit next weekend." Veronica smiled as she typed back, "We're good, really good. And yes to the visit. I want to show him off to his grandma." It was true. They were good. Not perfect, not without struggles, but genuinely okay. Caleb was thriving, hitting his milestones, becoming a happy, curious baby who laughed at peekaboo and reached for everything within his grasp. And Veronica was discovering that the woman she'd become, independent, resilient, focused on what truly mattered, was someone she actually liked, someone she was proud to be. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Jesse stood in the unemployment office for the third time that month, watching his savings account dwindle with each rejected job application. Word of his termination had spread through the tight-knit financial consulting community. Madison's version of events had taken on a life of its own, painting him as unstable, unprofessional, potentially dangerous. He'd lost 20 pounds, stopped shaving regularly, and developed a nervous habit of checking his phone obsessively for calls that never came. His house was in foreclosure. His credit was ruined. His reputation was destroyed. But for the first time in months, Jesse wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about Caleb, who would be 8 months old now, learning to crawl maybe, starting to eat solid foods, growing up without knowing that his father was trying, too late, too little, but trying, to become someone worthy of the title. Jesse had started attending AA meetings, not because he thought he was an alcoholic, but because he needed to hear other people talk about the consequences of their choices, about the long road back to self-respect. He'd sold his car and most of his furniture, keeping only the essentials. The house would be gone soon, but he'd found a studio apartment in a neighborhood where nobody knew his name or his story. It wasn't much, but it was honest. And for Jesse, honesty was something he was still learning how to practice. As he walked home through the Seattle drizzle, Jesse passed a playground where fathers were pushing their children on swings. The scene used to fill him with bitter regret. Now it filled him with something different, determination. He might never get the chance to be Caleb's father, but he could become the kind of man who deserved to be someone's father. It was a start. 1 year later, the coffee shop on 6th Avenue in Tacoma had become Veronica's sanctuary on Saturday mornings. While Caleb napped in his stroller beside her table, she spread her textbooks across the small surface, highlighting passages about family systems theory and child development. The University of Washington, Tacoma had accepted her into their social work program, and she was 3 months into her first semester. It wasn't easy. Between full-time work at the clinic, evening classes, and caring for a now-walking 14-month-old who had opinions about everything, Veronica felt perpetually exhausted. But it was a different kind of tired than the hollow emptiness she'd carried after leaving Jesse. This was the fatigue of building something meaningful. "Excuse me, are you Veronica Reed?" Veronica looked up to see a woman in her 40s, professionally dressed, with kind but nervous eyes. Something about her seemed familiar, though Veronica couldn't place where they might have met. "Yes," Veronica replied cautiously. "I'm Dr. Sarah Winters. I work with the Pierce County Family Services. One of your professors, Dr. Martinez, mentioned you might be interested in an internship opportunity." Veronica's heart skipped. Dr. Martinez had indeed mentioned submitting her name for consideration, but she hadn't expected such a quick response. It's a position working with young mothers in crisis situations, Dr. Winters continued, gesturing to the empty chair across from Veronica. May I? As Dr. Winters explained the internship, supporting mothers facing domestic violence, abandonment, or substance abuse, Veronica felt a familiar stirring. This was why she'd gone back to school, not just to rebuild her own life, but to help other women navigate the impossible choices she'd faced. The pay is minimal, Dr. Winters admitted, but the experience is invaluable. And honestly, we need someone who understands what these women are going through. Veronica glanced at Caleb, who was stirring in his stroller, his dark hair tousled from sleep. He'd grown so much in the past year, walking now saying mama and no with equal enthusiasm, developing his own little personality that was equal parts stubborn and sweet. When would I start? Veronica asked. Meanwhile, in a cramped studio apartment in South Seattle, Jesse stared at the acceptance letter in his hands for the third time that morning. The community college's automotive technology program wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, physical work. The kind of job where he could rebuild engines instead of trying to rebuild a reputation that was beyond repair. His unemployment had run out 6 months ago. He'd been working part-time at a grocery store, stocking shelves overnight and trying to save enough money to avoid becoming homeless. The house had been foreclosed on 8 months earlier. Everything he'd once thought defined him, the career, the income, the status, was gone. But somewhere in the wreckage, Jesse had found something he'd never expected: clarity. He'd been sober for 4 months now, attending AA meetings not because he was an alcoholic, but because he needed to learn how to be accountable for his choices. The group had become his only social connection, the only place where he could talk honestly about the consequences of his actions without judgment. The thing about rock bottom, his sponsor Frank had told him just last week, is that it gives you a solid place to start building. Jesse folded the acceptance letter carefully and placed it on his small table next to a photo, the only photo he'd kept from his old life. It showed Veronica at 7 months pregnant, laughing at something he'd said while they painted the nursery. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail and there was paint on her cheek, but she looked radiant, happy, trusting. He kept the photo not as a reminder of what he'd lost, but as a reminder of what love actually looked like when it wasn't twisted by selfishness and fear. That afternoon, Jesse walked into the community college's financial aid office to discuss payment plans. The counselor, Mrs. Davidson, was patient as they worked through his limited options. You qualify for maximum aid due to your income level, she explained, not unkindly. And there are some additional grants for students in career transition programs. Jesse nodded, signing papers and feeling something he hadn't experienced in over a year. Hope. Not hope for getting his old life back, that was gone forever. Hope for building something new, something honest. As he left the building, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him answer. Jesse Donovan? The voice was female, professional. Yes. This is Bethany Collins from the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services. I'm calling regarding a child support case. Jesse's legs went weak. He found a bench and sat down heavily. Child support? Mr. Donovan, we have a petition from Veronica Reed regarding financial support for your minor child, Caleb Reed. You're being notified that a hearing has been scheduled for— Wait, Jesse interrupted, his mind racing. Veronica filed for child support? Yes, sir. The hearing is scheduled for November 15th at the Pierce County Courthouse in Tacoma. You'll receive official documentation in the mail within the next few days. After the call ended, Jesse sat on the bench for a long time, watching students walk across campus. Young people starting their lives, making plans, believing in their futures. Veronica had found him. After 18 months of silence, she'd reached out, not for reconciliation, not for explanations, but for something practical, something that acknowledged Caleb's existence and Jesse's responsibility. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was recognition that he was Caleb's father, whether he'd earned that title or not. That evening, Jesse called Frank and asked to meet for coffee. She's asking for child support, Jesse explained, stirring his coffee nervously. I barely make enough to cover my own rent. I don't know how I'm supposed to. Jesse, Frank interrupted gently. What do you hear when you tell me this story? Jesse paused, considering. In the months of AA meetings, he'd learned to listen to his own words differently. I hear me making excuses again. What else? Jesse thought harder. I hear that she's giving me a chance to be responsible for my son even if I can't be his father. Frank nodded. That's a gift, Jesse. Maybe not the gift you wanted, but a gift nonetheless. Jesse drove home through the Seattle rain, thinking about Caleb, 14 months old now, walking, probably saying words. Growing up with a mother who was strong enough to build a life without depending on anyone, but principled enough to ensure his father contributed to his well-being. The child support hearing wasn't a punishment. It was an opportunity to finally do something right, even if it was the bare minimum of what a father should provide. Jesse looked at his acceptance letter when he got home, then at the photo of Veronica painting the nursery. For the first time since she'd left, he felt like he understood what she needed from him. Not promises he couldn't keep, not explanations she didn't want to hear, just the simple, consistent responsibility of supporting the child they'd created together. It was a start. The Pierce County Courthouse felt like a cathedral of consequences, its high ceilings and marble floors echoing with the footsteps of people whose lives were being officially reorganized by the state. Jesse sat on a wooden bench outside Family Courtroom B, wearing the only suit he still owned, threadbare at the elbows but clean and pressed. His hands shook slightly as he reviewed the financial disclosure forms his court-appointed attorney had helped him complete. The numbers told the story of his fall. Unemployed for 16 months, part-time grocery clerk for 6, community college student living in a studio apartment. Assets, none. Debts, substantial. Mr. Donovan? A young woman in a crisp pantsuit approached. I'm Jennifer Walsh representing Ms. Reed. She'd like to speak with you before we go in. Jesse's heart hammered against his ribs. After 18 months of wondering if he'd ever see Veronica again, she was here, in the same building, breathing the same air. Ms. Walsh led him to a small conference room where Veronica sat at a table, a folder of documents in front of her. She looked up when he entered and Jesse felt the air leave his lungs. She was different, not just older or thinner, though she was both. She carried herself differently, straighter, more purposeful. Her hair was shorter, framing her face in a way that made her look professional and serious. She wore a simple black dress and minimal makeup, but there was something luminous about her that he'd never noticed before. Confidence. She radiated the quiet confidence of someone who had tested herself and emerged stronger. "Hello, Jesse," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Veronica." He sat down across from her, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. You look good." "Thank you." She opened the folder and withdrew a photograph, sliding it across the table. "This is Caleb." Jesse's breath caught. The photo showed a toddler with dark hair and serious eyes, sitting in a sandbox and concentrating intently on filling a small bucket with sand. He was beautiful, sturdy and healthy, and completely absorbed in his task. "He's walking now," Veronica said, watching Jesse's face. "Talking. He says truck and cookie and more for everything he wants. He loves books and music boxes and throwing balls for no particular reason." Jesse traced the edge of the photo with his finger, trying to reconcile this real child with the abstract concept of fatherhood he'd been carrying. "He's perfect." "He is." Veronica's voice carried no warmth but no anger either. Just fact. "And he deserves financial support from both his parents." Jesse looked up from the photo. "I don't make much money, Veronica. I'm in school, working part-time." "I know." She gestured to her own paperwork. "I've seen your financial disclosure. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable. The state calculator suggests $87 a month based on your current income." $87. Jesse spent more than that on coffee in a month when he'd been at Meridian Financial. Now it represented nearly a week of groceries. "I can do that," he said quietly. "I also want you to know that I'm not doing this to punish you," Veronica continued. "I'm doing it because Caleb has a right to support from his father, and I have a right to know that you're contributing to his well-being, even in a small way." Jesse nodded, unable to speak around the tightness in his throat. "I don't want contact between you and Caleb right now," Veronica said, her voice gentler but firm. "Maybe someday, when he's older and can understand complicated situations, but not now. Can I ask?" Jesse's voice was hoarse. "Can I ask how you are? Really?" Veronica considered the question for a long moment. "I'm in school, social work program at UW-Tacoma. I'm doing an internship with Family Services, helping other women in crisis situations. I work at a community health clinic. Caleb goes to a wonderful daycare where he has friends and learns things every day." Each detail was like a small knife, not because she was unhappy, but because she was clearly thriving without him. "I'm proud of you," Jesse said, and meant it completely. Something flickered across Veronica's face. Surprise, maybe, or pain. Don't do that, Jesse. Don't do what? Don't try to be the supportive ex-husband. Don't try to make this a moment of connection or healing or whatever you think this might be. Her voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath. You lost the right to be proud of me when you chose someone else over our family. The words hit like a physical blow, but Jessie didn't argue. She was right. I just want you to know that I'm not the same person who ran away in the middle of the night, Veronica continued. I'm stronger now, more independent. I've built a life that doesn't need you in it. But Caleb is your son and you have financial responsibilities to him. That's all this is. 20 minutes later, they sat in the courtroom as Judge Harrison reviewed their agreement. The proceeding was businesslike and brief. Jesse would pay $87 monthly in child support, with automatic deductions from his paychecks. If his income increased, the amount would be adjusted accordingly. Mr. Donovan, Judge Harrison said, do you understand that failure to pay child support can result in wage garnishment, asset seizure, and contempt of court charges? Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Reed, are you satisfied with this arrangement? Yes, Your Honor. Then this order is final and effective immediately. The judge signed the papers with the efficient motion of someone who processed dozens of similar cases every week. As they left the courtroom, Jesse walked slowly, trying to extend these last moments of being in the same space as his son's mother. Veronica, he called as she reached the courthouse steps. She turned back, her expression patient but distant. I know I don't have the right to ask this, but could you maybe send me a photo sometimes, just so I can see how he's growing? Veronica studied his face for a long moment. I'll think about it. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Jessie watched her walk away, her heels clicking confidently against the concrete. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. As he drove back to Seattle, Jessie thought about the man in the photograph she'd shown him. His son, serious and focused, building something in a sandbox, building something with patience and concentration and the absolute belief that what he was creating mattered. Jessie wanted to learn how to do that. But first, he had $87 to earn. 3 months after the court hearing, the alarm on Jesse's phone buzzed at 4:30 a.m., pulling him from dreams he couldn't remember. In the cramped studio apartment, he'd perfected the art of getting ready without making noise, a skill left over from the days when Madison would complain about early morning sounds. Now the silence belonged only to him, and somehow that felt like progress. Jesse dressed quickly in his work uniform, navy blue coveralls with Randy's Auto Repair embroidered on the chest pocket. The community college automotive program had connected him with Randy Kowalski, a gruff 60-year-old who ran a small shop in Georgetown and needed someone willing to work for little pay while learning the trade. You don't know shit about cars, Randy had said during Jesse's interview, but you show up on time and you don't make excuses. That puts you ahead of half the mechanics I've trained. 3 months later, Jesse's hands were permanently stained with engine oil, his back ached from bending over hoods, and he'd never felt more honest about his place in the world. At exactly 5:45 a.m., Jesse stopped by the ATM outside the 7-Eleven on his route to work. Every month on the 15th, he withdrew $87 in cash and drove the 45 minutes to Tacoma, leaving the money in an envelope under the welcome mat at the address listed in the court documents. He'd never seen Veronica during these trips, though he'd caught glimpses of a blue car seat in the back of a silver Toyota Corolla parked in the driveway. Evidence of Caleb's existence, even if Jesse couldn't see the boy himself. The house was a small craftsman-style home with a well-maintained yard and children's toys scattered on the front porch. Wind chimes hung from the eaves, and there were herbs growing in window boxes. It looked like a home where someone was loved and cared for, exactly what Jesse hoped his son was experiencing. This morning was different, though. As Jesse approached the front door, he could hear voices from the backyard, a woman's laughter, and then a higher, delighted giggle that made his chest tighten with recognition. Almost without thinking, Jesse found himself walking around the side of the house, drawn by the sound of his son's happiness. Through the gaps in the wooden fence, he could see Veronica pushing a small boy on a swing set. Caleb had grown so much since the photograph. His legs were longer, his hair more unruly, and his laugh was pure joy as he soared back and forth. "Higher, Mama, higher," Caleb called out, his voice clear and confident. "Any higher and you'll fly away," Veronica replied, laughing. "Then what would I do?" "Catch me!" Caleb shrieked with delight. Jesse gripped the fence slats, drinking in the sight of his son. Caleb was beautiful, healthy and happy and completely secure in his mother's love. Watching them together, Jesse felt a complex mixture of grief and gratitude. Grief for everything he was missing. Gratitude that Caleb was flourishing without him. Jesse. He spun around, startled. Veronica stood at the corner of the house, her expression unreadable. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking younger than she had in the courthouse. "I'm sorry," Jesse said quickly. I heard him laughing and You were watching us." It wasn't a question. Jesse felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I shouldn't have. I'll go." "Wait." Veronica glanced back toward the yard where Caleb continued swinging, oblivious to the adult drama unfolding nearby. "How long have you been leaving the money on the porch?" "Every month on the 15th. Jesse's mouth felt dry. "I know I could mail it, but I wanted to make sure it got to you safely." "You drive down from Seattle every month?" Jesse nodded. "It's not that far." Veronica studied his face for a long moment. "You look different." Jesse was aware of the changes in himself. 20 pounds of muscle gained from physical work, hands that were calloused and competent, a face that had lost the soft edges of office life. "I'm working with my hands now. Auto repair." "That's good," Veronica said and seemed to mean it. "Honest work." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the sound of Caleb's laughter filling the space between them. "He's beautiful, Veronica. You're doing an amazing job with him." "I know I am." There was no arrogance in her voice, just quiet confidence. "But thank you." Jesse pulled the envelope from his pocket and held it out to her. This month's payment. Instead of taking it immediately, Veronica seemed to be making a decision. "Jesse, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Okay. Are you doing this, the job, the payments, driving down here every month because you think it will lead to something? Because you think if you're consistent enough, responsible enough, I'll change my mind about us?" The question hit Jesse like a bucket of cold water. He wanted to say no, wanted to claim pure motives, but Veronica deserved better than his automatic deflection. "Maybe at first," he admitted quietly. "Maybe for the first few months, I hoped. But no, not anymore. I'm doing this because Caleb deserves it. Because I owe it to him whether I ever get to know him or not." Veronica took the envelope and tucked it into her pocket. "Good. Because there is no us anymore, Jesse. There's just Caleb, and your responsibility to him. I understand. Do you? Because I need you to understand that I'm not the woman who was afraid to leave the hospital alone with a newborn. I'm not the woman who needed you to validate her choices or make her feel worthy. I've built a life I'm proud of, and I won't let anyone, including you, threaten that stability." Jesse absorbed her words, recognizing the strength that had replaced the vulnerability he'd once taken for granted. "I'm proud of who you've become," he said quietly. "I don't need your pride, Jesse. I need your consistency." Veronica's voice softened slightly. "But I will say this. You showing up every month without drama or demands or expectations means something. Not to me, but to Caleb's future. Someday he'll ask about his father, and I'll be able to tell him that you kept your word." As Jesse drove back to Seattle, he thought about Veronica's words. She was right. He had initially hoped that being reliable might earn him forgiveness, or at least reconsideration. But somewhere along the way, his motivation had shifted. The monthly drives to Tacoma had become less about winning anything back and more about proving to himself that he could be trusted with something important, even if that something was just $87 and a promise to show up. For now, that was enough. 2 years after the court hearing, the Pierce County Family Services building buzzed with the controlled chaos of a Monday morning. Veronica sat in her small office reviewing case files for the day's home visits when her supervisor knocked on the door. "Veronica, we have a new case that just came in. Emergency placement. Dr. Angela Foster, no relation to the clinic's Dr. Foster, but equally kind," handed her a thick folder. "Single mother, substance abuse, 2 children removed by CPS last night. The family has requested you specifically." Veronica opened the file and felt her blood turn cold. The name at the top read, Madison Clark. The address was a low-income apartment complex in Lakewood. The children were listed as Emma, age 3, and Dylan, age 18 months. "What's wrong?" Dr. Foster asked, noticing Veronica's pale complexion. I know this woman. Not well, but we have history." Veronica's mind raced. Madison Clark, Jesse's former mistress, the woman who had destroyed her marriage and then apparently destroyed Jesse's career as well. "If there's a conflict of interest, I can assign someone else." "No." Veronica surprised herself with the firmness of her response. "No, I can handle this professionally. These children need help, and that's what matters." An hour later, Veronica stood outside a rundown apartment complex, her heart hammering despite her professional composure. She'd spent 2.5 years building a life based on integrity and purpose. She wouldn't let her personal history compromise her ability to help 2 children who needed advocacy. The woman who answered the door bore little resemblance to the polished professional Jesse had chosen over his family. Madison's blonde hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled and stained. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she gestured Veronica inside. "They said you were coming," Madison said, her voice hoarse. "I didn't know. I mean, when they said Veronica Reed, I didn't realize that I was Jesse's ex-wife." Veronica finished calmly. "Yes, I imagine that's a surprise." The apartment was a disaster. Toys scattered across stained carpet, dishes piled in the sink, the smell of cigarettes and something sour permeating the air. Evidence of a life that had spiraled far beyond control. Madison wrapped her arms around herself defensively. "I suppose you're enjoying this, seeing me like this." Veronica pulled out her notebook and pen, forcing herself to focus on the job. "Ms. Clark, I'm here because your children were removed from your custody last night due to suspected neglect and your admission of methamphetamine use. My job is to assess your situation and determine what services you need to work toward reunification with Emma and Dylan." "You don't have to pretend to care," Madison said bitterly. "I know what you must think of me." Veronica looked up from her notes, studying the broken woman in front of her. This was the person Jesse had chosen. This was the woman he'd believed was worth destroying his family for. And now she was just another client in crisis, another mother who'd lost her way. "Ms. Clark, what I think about our past is irrelevant. What matters is that you have 2 children who need their mother to get healthy and stable. Are you willing to do the work required to make that happen?" Madison sank onto the couch, her facade of defiance crumbling. "I don't know how it got this bad. After Jesse, after everything fell apart with him, I couldn't find work. My reputation was ruined. My savings were gone. I met someone who said he could help me forget the pain and..." She gestured helplessly at the chaos around them. "The drugs started as a way to cope. Then they became the only way I could function. Then they became the only thing that mattered." Madison's voice broke. "I love my kids, but I can't take care of them like this." Veronica felt an unexpected surge of something that wasn't quite sympathy, but wasn't satisfaction either. This woman had made choices that destroyed multiple lives. Jesse's, her own, and now her children's. But sitting in this apartment, seeing the devastation that those choices had wrought, Veronica felt only sadness for the waste of it all. "The first step is admitting you need help," Veronica said, her voice gentler. "The second step is accepting that recovery is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. Are you ready for that?" Madison nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I have to be. My babies. They deserve better than this." 3 hours later, Veronica sat in her car outside the apartment complex processing what had just happened. She'd spent the morning arranging for Madison's admission to a residential treatment program, coordinating with the children's temporary foster placement, and setting up a timeline for potential reunification. It had been one of the most professionally challenging cases of her career, not because of its complexity, but because of its personal resonance. Seeing Madison's complete destruction had been like looking at an alternate timeline. What might have happened if Veronica had chosen differently when Jesse betrayed her? If she'd stayed and fought for a marriage built on lies? If she'd tried to compete with Madison for Jesse's attention? If she'd allowed Jesse's choices to define her worth instead of finding her own strength? Her phone buzzed with a text from her babysitter. "Caleb is asking when Mommy will be home. Should I tell him after snack time?" Veronica smiled, the weight of the morning lifting slightly. Caleb was now 3 years old, bright and curious and completely secure in his mother's love. He attended an excellent preschool, had friends, knew his letters and numbers, and believed the world was a safe and predictable place because Veronica had worked tirelessly to make it so. She texted back, "Tell him I'll be home before dinner and we'll read his favorite book. Thank you, Kelly." As she drove back to Tacoma, Veronica thought about the different paths lives could take. Madison had chosen immediate gratification over long-term consequences and was now fighting for the chance to be a mother to children who barely knew her. Jesse had chosen selfishness over responsibility and was now working to earn the right to call himself a father. And Veronica had chosen the harder path, leaving everything familiar to build something new, and had discovered that she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. That evening, as she read "Goodnight Moon" to Caleb for the 100th time, Veronica reflected on the day's strange symmetry. Her son sat in her lap, his dark hair still damp from his bath, his small hand tracing the pictures in the book. "Mama," he said sleepily, "why do some kids not live with their mommies?" The question, innocent and observant, came from his growing awareness that not all families looked like theirs. Some of his preschool friends lived with grandparents, or had divorced parents, or were in foster care. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that aren't good for children, Veronica explained carefully. And sometimes other grown-ups have to help keep the children safe until their parents can make better choices. Like your job. Like my job. Caleb considered this seriously. Are you going to help those kids? I'm going to try, baby. I'm going to try very hard. As Caleb drifted off to sleep in her arms, Veronica realized that seeing Madison today had given her something unexpected. Closure. Not the dramatic confrontation she'd sometimes imagined, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she'd chosen correctly. She'd chosen dignity over revenge, growth over stagnation, her son's future over her own pain. And tomorrow, she'd help another mother learn to make better choices, even if that mother was the woman who had once helped destroy her marriage. Because that's what strength looked like when it was built on something solid. 5 years after Veronica left, the late afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Randy's auto repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor where Jesse worked methodically on a transmission rebuild. His hands moved with the practiced confidence of someone who had found his calling in honest work. At 39, he looked like a different man than the one who had woken up in a hotel room 5 years ago. Leaner, weathered, but somehow more solid. "Jesse," Randy called from the office, "you got a visitor." Jesse looked up, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Through the bay door, he could see a familiar figure standing in the waiting area. Frank, his AA sponsor, holding what looked like official papers. "Hey, Frank, what brings you here?" Jesse asked, walking over to where the older man stood. Frank's expression was serious but not unkind. "Got something here you need to see. From the state of Washington." He handed Jesse an envelope with the Department of Social and Health Services logo. Jesse's stomach dropped as he tore open the envelope. The letterhead read, "Notice of Child Support Modification Hearing." "What does this mean?" Jesse asked, scanning the legal language that might as well have been written in a foreign language. "Means Veronica is asking for an increase in child support," Frank explained. "Your income has gone up considerably since the original order, right?" Jesse nodded. After completing his automotive program, he'd been promoted to lead mechanic at Randy's shop. The pay was still modest by his old standards, but it was stable, honest work that had allowed him to move to a small one-bedroom apartment and even start a savings account. "This isn't necessarily bad news, Jesse," Frank continued. "It means she believes you're financially stable enough to contribute more to Caleb's care." Jesse read through the paperwork more carefully. The hearing was scheduled for the following month. According to the documentation, Veronica was requesting an increase from $87 to $230 monthly, based on Jesse's current income. "I can afford it," Jesse said quietly. "That's not the issue." "Then what is?" Jesse looked out at the street, watching parents pick up their children from the elementary school across the way. "It means Caleb is getting older, 5 years old now, starting to ask questions about why some kids have dads and he doesn't." 3 weeks later, Jesse sat in the same courthouse where he'd last seen Veronica, but this time he'd hired his own attorney, a kind woman named Laura Steinberg, who specialized in family law and had helped him understand his rights as a non-custodial father. When Veronica entered the courtroom with her lawyer, Jesse was struck again by how much she'd changed. She wore a professional Navy suit and carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had built a career helping others navigate crisis. Her hair was longer now, and there were small lines around her eyes, but she looked content in a way that made Jesse both happy and deeply sad. The hearing itself was straightforward. Jesse agreed to the increased child support without contest, and the judge approved the modification efficiently. But as they gathered their papers afterward, Jesse found himself walking alongside Veronica toward the courthouse exit. "How is he?" Jesse asked quietly. Veronica paused, considering whether to answer. "He's good. Really good. Smart. Kind. Curious about everything. He starts kindergarten in the fall." "Does he?" Jesse struggled with the words. "Does he ask about me?" Veronica stopped walking and turned to face him. "Yes, he does." The simple answer hit Jesse harder than any anger or recrimination could have. "What do you tell him?" "I tell him that his father loves him, but can't be with us right now. That someday, when he's older, he'll understand better. Veronica's voice was measured, careful. I don't lie to him, Jesse, but I also don't burden him with adult complications. Jesse nodded, his throat tight. That's probably right. They walked in silence for a moment before Veronica spoke again. You look good, Jesse. Healthier than I've seen you in years. I am healthier. Sober 3 years now. Working with my hands. Living honestly. Jesse glanced at her profile. I heard you got your degree. Social work. I did. I work with families in crisis now, trying to help parents who've lost their way find it again. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. As they reached the courthouse steps, Veronica stopped again. Jesse, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay? Do you think you'll ever be ready to be a real father to Caleb? Not just someone who sends money, but someone who shows up for school plays and soccer games and homework help? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge and an opportunity. I don't know, Jesse answered honestly. I want to believe I will be. I think about it every day. But I also know that wanting something and being ready for it are different things. Veronica studied his face for a long moment. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 6 years. I'm trying to learn how to be honest. I can see that. Veronica shifted her purse to her other shoulder. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Jesse nodded. In 2 years, when Caleb turns 7, I'm going to tell him that his father has been learning how to be a better person and might be ready to meet him. Not as someone who gets to walk back into our lives, but as someone who might earn the privilege of being part of his life. Jesse's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. Veronica, I'm not doing this for you, Jesse. I'm doing it for Caleb because every child deserves the chance to know their parent if that parent is safe and stable and committed to their well-being. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't a guarantee. This is a chance to prove that you've really changed. If you disappoint him, if you make promises you can't keep or put your needs ahead of his, that will be the end of it. Forever. Jesse wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I won't disappoint him. See that you don't. As Veronica walked toward her car, she didn't look back. She'd given Jesse the greatest gift she could offer, hope balanced with accountability. Not forgiveness, which he didn't deserve, but opportunity, which his son deserved. Jesse sat on the courthouse steps for a long time after she drove away, watching the afternoon fade into evening. 2 years to prove he was worthy of being called Dad. 2 years to demonstrate that the man he'd become was someone a little boy could trust and respect. It wasn't enough time, and it was all the time in the world. Jesse pulled out his phone and called Frank. Hey, it's me. Yeah, everything went fine. Listen, I need to ask you something. You think a guy can really change? Not just stop drinking or get a better job, but actually become a different person? Frank's familiar chuckle came through the speaker. Jesse, you asking me or telling me? Jesse looked up at the courthouse where his future had just been decided by his past, where a woman he'd once taken for granted had just offered him a chance at redemption he'd never thought possible. I guess I'm telling you, Jesse said quietly. I guess I'm telling you that I already have. As he drove back to Seattle through the gathering twilight, Jesse thought about Caleb, 5 years old, starting kindergarten, asking questions about fathers. In 2 years, that little boy would have the chance to meet his dad. Jesse intended to make sure that when that day came, his son would meet a man worth knowing. The work of becoming that man started now. 2 years later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Veronica's kitchen as she packed Caleb's lunch for his second day of second grade. At 7 years old, he was all energy and questions, his dark hair sticking up despite her attempts to smooth it down with water. Mama, will you pick me up today or will Mrs. Patterson? He asked, referring to the after-school program coordinator. I'll pick you up today, sweetheart. We have somewhere special to go. Caleb looked up from his cereal bowl, suddenly alert. Where? Veronica sat down across from him, her expression gentle but serious. Do you remember how we've talked about your daddy? About how he's been learning to be a better person? Caleb nodded solemnly. This conversation had evolved over the past 2 years, becoming more detailed as he grew old enough to understand complex emotions. Well, today you're going to meet him. Caleb's spoon clattered into his bowl. Really? Today? Really today. But I need you to understand something important. Veronica reached across the table and took his small hands in hers. This doesn't mean our family is changing. You and I will always be together, always be our own team. Your daddy is someone who loves you and wants to be part of your life, but our home, our routine, our life together, that all stays the same. Will he live with us? No, baby. He has his own home. But if today goes well, and if you want to, You might visit him sometimes, or he might come to your baseball games or school plays. Caleb considered this with the serious concentration he applied to everything important. What if I don't like him? Then we'll figure that out together. You never have to do anything that doesn't feel right to you, okay? Okay. Caleb brightened suddenly. Can I tell Tyler at school that I met my dad? Veronica smiled. You can tell anyone you want to tell. That afternoon, Veronica and Caleb sat on a bench at Point Defiance Park, watching boats in the distance. Caleb swung his legs nervously, occasionally looking around for any sign of the father he'd imagined for so long. Is that him? Caleb whispered, pointing to a jogger in the distance. No, sweetheart. You'll know when it's him. Jesse appeared exactly on time, walking slowly across the grass toward their bench. Veronica felt her breath catch, not from any lingering emotion for him, but from the magnitude of this moment. 7 years of absence, 7 years of growth and change, all leading to this first meeting between father and son. Jesse looked good, clean, healthy, wearing jeans and a simple blue shirt. His hair was shorter than she remembered, with touches of gray at the temples. He walked with the steady gait of someone who had learned to take his time, to think before acting. Caleb, Veronica said softly, this is your daddy. Jesse stopped a respectful distance away, kneeling down so he was at Caleb's eye level. For a moment, father and son simply looked at each other, taking measure of this person they'd both wondered about for so long. Hi, Caleb, Jesse said quietly. I'm really happy to meet you. Caleb studied Jesse's face with the frank curiosity of childhood. You look like me, he observed. Jesse smiled, and Veronica could see tears gathering in his eyes. I think you look like your mama, but yeah, maybe we have the same nose. Are you really my daddy? I am. I know I haven't been around, and I know that's confusing. But yes, I'm your daddy, and I've thought about you every single day since you were born. Caleb glanced at his mother for reassurance, then back at Jesse. Mama says you were learning to be better. That's right. I made some big mistakes before you were born, and I had to learn how to fix them. It took me a long time, but I think I'm better now. What kind of mistakes? Jesse looked at Veronica, who nodded slightly. They'd agreed that honesty, age-appropriate but complete, was the only way forward. I hurt your mama's feelings very badly, and I wasn't ready to be a good daddy. So your mama made the brave choice to take care of you by herself, until I could learn how to be the kind of person you deserve to have as a father. Caleb absorbed this information with the remarkable resilience of children. Are you ready now? I hope so, Jesse said honestly. But that's something you get to decide. We can take as much time as you need to figure out if you want me to be part of your life. Can you throw a baseball? Jesse laughed, surprised by the practical turn of the conversation. Yes, I can throw a baseball. Do you like baseball? I'm on a team, the Tacoma Tigers. We're in second place in our league. That's awesome. I'd love to hear about your team. An hour later, Veronica watched from the bench as Jesse pushed Caleb on the swing set. Their conversation had evolved from careful politeness to genuine interest, with Caleb peppering Jesse with questions about his job, his apartment, whether he had any pets. He seems nice, Caleb had whispered to Veronica during a brief break, and he knows a lot about cars. Now, hearing Caleb's delighted laughter as Jesse pushed him higher and higher, Veronica felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. Not happiness for Jesse exactly, but satisfaction that she'd made the right choice in allowing this meeting. Jesse had kept every promise he'd made over the past 2 years. The child support payments arrived consistently, often with small notes asking about Caleb's health or school progress. He'd sent birthday cards with age-appropriate gifts that showed he'd listened when Veronica mentioned Caleb's interests. He'd attended a few of Caleb's baseball games, sitting quietly in the stands without trying to approach or insert himself into their routine. Most importantly, he'd demonstrated the patience and respect that this situation required. Mama, Caleb called out as Jesse helped him down from the swing. Can Dad come to my game on Saturday? The word Dad hung in the air like a small miracle. Jesse's face crumpled briefly with emotion before he composed himself. If your mama says it's okay, Jesse said carefully. Veronica looked at her son's hopeful face, then at Jesse's cautious expression. I think that would be fine. As they walked back to the parking area, Caleb chattering excitedly about his team's chances in the upcoming championship, Jesse fell into step beside Veronica. Thank you, he said quietly, for this chance, for raising him to be so incredible, for everything. Don't thank me yet, Veronica replied, but her tone was kind rather than warning. This is just the beginning. The real work starts now. I know, I'm ready for the real work. Veronica looked at him. really looked at him. For the first time in years, she saw someone who had been broken and had chosen to rebuild himself piece by piece. Someone who had learned that love meant showing up consistently, not just feeling intensely. "I believe you are," she said. At their cars, Caleb hugged Jesse goodbye with the easy affection of a child who had decided to trust. "See you Saturday, Dad." Jesse hugged him back, careful not to hold on too long or too tight. "Wouldn't miss it, buddy." As Veronica buckled Caleb into his car seat, he looked up at her with shining eyes. "Mama, I think I like having a dad." "I think you do too, baby." Driving home through the familiar streets of Tacoma, Veronica reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this moment. 7 years ago, she'd been a frightened new mother, abandoned by someone she'd trusted completely. Today, she was a confident woman who had built a life of purpose and meaning, raising a son who felt secure enough to open his heart to someone new. The betrayal that had once felt like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of something better. Not the life she'd planned, but the life she'd chosen to build from the wreckage of broken promises. And Jesse? Jesse had learned that being a father wasn't about being present for the easy moments, but about earning the privilege of being trusted with someone's heart. It had taken him 7 years to become worthy of the title, Dad, but watching him with Caleb today, Veronica believed he finally was. Love, she'd discovered, wasn't about dramatic gestures or passionate promises. Love was about showing up, consistently, patiently, with no guarantee of anything except the opportunity to try again tomorrow. That evening, as she tucked Caleb into bed, he looked up at her with Jesse's serious dark eyes and her own determined chin. "Mama, I'm glad you waited until he was ready." Veronica kissed his forehead, her heart full of gratitude for the wisdom children sometimes possess. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Outside, Tacoma settled into its evening rhythm, and Veronica Reed closed her eyes, finally understanding that some stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with something better. The quiet satisfaction of choices made with courage, and love built on truth. Sometimes the hardest thing about being betrayed isn't the pain of what they did. It's finding the strength to walk away from everything you thought you wanted and build something better from nothing. Veronica could have stayed and fought for a broken marriage. She could have competed with Madison for Jesse's attention. She could have accepted his apologies and hoped he'd change. Instead, she chose something much braver. She chose herself. She chose her son's future over her own comfort. She chose dignity over desperation. And in the end, her quiet strength didn't just save her, it saved them all. What would you have done in Veronica's position? Would you have had the courage to walk away from everything familiar and start over completely alone? I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.